So now we are going to talk about the 2021 Chicago Bears offseason. We're going to preview the offseason, and they have $2.5 million. They're $2.5 million over the cap right now. They just cut Buster Screen, which was a guy I had them cutting. That would free up about $5 million. So now they're about like $3 million over. But they can cut Charles Leno Jr. for $9 million, Jimmy Graham for $7 million, and Javon Wims for $2 million. This is unpopular, but they could cut Akeem Hicks for $10.5 million, cut or trade him. I think Akeem Hicks is a very good player, but I'm not sure if I'd keep him at $10.5 million. That's really something they'd have to decide. You got to get more offensive talent on that team. So because of that, I'm skeptical of keeping a defensive tackle at a $10.5 million price point. But I think I'd move this defense to a 4-3 defense. Khalil Mack is getting older in age. So is Robert Quinn. Because of that, I think they'd be much better as defensive ends than outside linebackers. So I'd move this defense to a 4-3, put Roquan Smith at the inside linebacker spot, Danny Trevathan at an outside linebacker spot because he has lost some speed. So I changed that. But they're pending free agents right now. Allen Robinson, which is the biggest one, Trubisky, Cordell Patterson, Roy Robertson Harris, Barkevius Mingo, Tashawn Gibson, Jermaine Fetty, Cairo Santos, Eddie Pinheiro, Brent Urban, Rashad Coward, and Mario Edwards.
Yeah, I think Allen Robinson is the name that jumps off the paper. If you can bring him back, you bring him back. There's no question about it. I think he's been one of the most underlooked receivers of the past few years, but the problem is I don't know if he's going to want to come back. I don't think he will come back because of the quarterback situation, which I think is going to be one of their biggest question marks this offseason. Do you bring Mitch Trubisky back? Personally, I don't know what their outlook is at quarterback. I don't think that Mitch Trubisky is the guy of the future for them. I think they should start looking elsewhere. If they can make a Deshaun Watson trade happen, obviously go out and do that, and that would make bringing back Allen Robinson a much more realistic possibility. I don't think that's a realistic, I don't think that would happen in the real world. So, I think obviously you have to move on from Allen Robinson. Unfortunately, I don't think there's too many guys on here that are super important to bring back, especially with their cap situation. A guy like Roy Robertson Harris is a guy that I would think about bringing back. Cordell Patterson plays, kind of Swiss Army knife role for them. I think he would be a nice addition to bring back, but I don't think there are too many guys on here that are pressing to bring back, especially with their money situation.
I mean, for me, even with the cuts, let's say we keep Akeem Hicks, they'd have about $20 million in cap space. Allen Robinson is probably going to demand that a year.
Yeah.
So I am not bringing back Allen Robinson. As crazy as that sounds, I'm not bringing him back. He's going to be way too expensive, and they need to fill way more holes on a roster before they figure out, before they bring a receiver who's going to cost that much. So for me, I'm re-signing Cordell Patterson because he's the best special teamer in the game right now, special team returner, kick returner in the game. He is the best. Roy Robertson Harris, I'd bring him back. Santos, one of the best kickers in the NFL last season, I'm bringing him back. Tashawn Gibson had a really good year last year. I'm bringing him back. And Rashad Coward, I'm bringing him back as well. Positions of need, quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, and a slot corner. So at quarterback, they can go Jacoby Brissett, or they can trade for Sam Darnold. I don't think they're going Jacoby because they have Nick Foles. Nick Foles will most likely be the starter. And maybe they trade for Sam Darnold. I'm still not sure. I don't think they go that route. I think the Washington football team is much more likely to trade for Sam Darnold. Then at wide receiver, you got guys like Tyrell Williams, who hasn't been able to stay healthy, but when he is healthy, he's a really good receiver. And if you can get him on a really cheap deal to come play for the Bears, I think he can have a really good season. You look at Sammy Watkins, Brashard Perriman, Adam Humphries, Corey Davis, Keelan Cole, DeMarcus Robinson, Rashard Higgins, Tim Patrick, Zach Pascal. There are a lot of good receivers, even though if you don't have number one in Allen Robinson coming back, this receiving core can be okay. I mean, I think Darnell Mooney has upside to be a high-level number 2, a low-end number 1, because I think Darnell Mooney is a really good receiver. I'm not too sold on Anthony Miller, but if they can bring in a good receiver in free agency, I think that would help them a lot. So then at tackle, Russell Okung, Kelvin Beacom, DeMar Dotson, Matt Filer, Mike Remmers, Taylor Martin, and at slot corner, Brian Poole, Mike Hilton, K'Wan Williams, Troy Hill, and Cameron Sutton. So in my dream scenario for bringing in free agents, if I'm the Bears, I'm bringing back Tim Patrick, and I'm signing Tim Patrick, and I'm signing Cameron Sutton to be my slot corner. So all in all, Tim Patrick will line up next to Darnell Mooney. I'm going to look to address the wide receiver position in the draft as well. And Cameron Sutton lined up next to Kyle Fuller and Jalen Johnson would be one of the better cornerback trios in the entire NFL.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, I think offensive line is a more important position, at least than wide receiver on the offensive side of the ball. And I also don't think they're going to figure out the quarterback situation this offseason just because their pick doesn't put them in a position to figure it out with a first-round talent that can step in and play from day one. There's really not a lot of realistic options in free agency or through the trade at this point unless you want to go with Sam Darnold. But personally, even as a Jet fan and a guy who thinks Sam Darnold could turn it around in a good situation, I don't think it makes sense for them to give up the capital to get a guy like Sam Darnold. At that point, you might as well just bring back Trubisky because you're bringing in a project. So I don't think that would make much sense for them. So I think quarterback is going to have to wait unless they want to go later on in the draft. Offensive line, a lot of guys you mentioned. One guy that you didn't mention, Alejandro Villanueva, was a guy I was thinking maybe they could bring in, but I think shoring up that offensive line is a huge position of need and something they need to take care of this offseason. Wide receiver, like you mentioned, it probably would make more sense to go through the draft, especially, you're losing Allen Robinson and you're not going to be able to find somebody of that caliber with the money that you have. So I think it makes more sense to go through the draft, try and find a stud that can maybe not replace Allen Robinson, but eventually replace Allen Robinson on a rookie deal. And there's a couple other positions in need, but I think they have to go bargain bin shopping just because they don't have the cap space to go out and get big-name guys.
See, for me, I think the offensive line isn't that much of a problem. Like, I know they want to get younger at tackle. Charles Leno probably gets cut, but he had an okay year last year. Bobby Massey, I think, is a good tackle. Cody Whitehair at guard played really well. I think their center, Sam Mustipher, was pretty okay. I mean, he's a really young player, so he's going to only keep getting better. And James Daniels is not too good, but he's manageable. For me, the only way you move off of Charles Leno is you get a younger and better tackle. Russell Okung is a better tackle, but he's 33. Yeah. It makes no sense. Alejandro Villanueva, yes, he's a good tackle. He's been one for his career, but he's 38. He's nearing retirement. So I'm not sure if I'd go that route. I might just stick with what I have and draft a tackle in the draft because this is a loaded tackle draft. So I don't think I'd address the tackle position in free agency. I just look at the draft. And they have the 20th pick in the first round, the second round, the third, 5th, and 6th round. This is what I'm going to say. If Mac Jones is there at the 20th pick, you draft Mac Jones. No doubt about it. If Mac Jones is there at the 20th pick, you draft him. Do I think he will be there? Probably not. But if he is there, you draft Mac Jones no matter what. You get him to be that quarterback because I think he's the best bang for your buck at that 20th overall pick. He can turn into a very good quarterback. But if he's not there, Christian Darrisaw at left tackle or at any tackle spot, he would be a good fit there. Maybe Charles Leno gets cut if you bring in Christian Darrisaw, or you can have Darrisaw learn under Charles Leno. It can go either way. Trey Lance, if you want to trade up for him, maybe you'll see what happens. Elijah Vera Tucker and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. If he is there at 20, you take him if Mac Jones and Darrisaw are off the board because he is going to be a really good linebacker. And other guys can be J.C. Horn, Jalen Mayfield, or Tevin Jenkins. But my three best players to get at that 20th pick would be Christian Darrisaw, Mac Jones, or Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. That's who I target. And in the second round, I target Jamin Davis, linebacker out of Kentucky. If I can't get a linebacker in the first round, Terrace Marshall Jr. out of LSU, Christian Barrymore, defensive lineman from Alabama. So if you get a defensive lineman in the draft, you could maybe move on from Akeem Hicks easier. And Kelvin Joseph, cornerback out of Kentucky. Jabril Cox, Dylan Radins is another guy out of North Dakota State who played with Trey Lance, who's a tackle. But in my second round, I think the Bears get Rashad Bateman. I think he's going to last that long to where they're picking.
Wow.
And I think Rashad Bateman will go to Chicago. So my dream draft basically for the first 2 rounds are the Bears drafting Christian Darrisaw and Rashad Bateman. And in the third round, you got guys like Brevin Jordan, Levi Onwuzurike, Sam Cosmi, Chaz Surratt, Talania Hofunga. So there are a lot of guys, but in my dream scenario for the draft for the first 4 rounds, I have the Bears drafting Christian Darrisaw, Rashad Bateman, Jay Tufele, and Brevin Jordan. So getting a tight end, getting a tackle, getting a wide receiver, and getting a defensive tackle. So it'll be easier to move on from Akeem Hicks if you choose to go that direction later on.
Yeah, even as low as I've been on Mac Jones, at 20 or later, I would not hate that pick. You know, even as much as I've knocked on him, he had a great college career. There's no debating that. And, you know, I don't think he's, I'm not ready to write him off by any means. I think at the 20th pick, he could be a solid pick. If you don't want to go quarterback there, I think later on in the draft, you could get a guy that you've mentioned throughout a couple of these previews, Jamie Newman from Georgia. He's a little bit more of a wild card, but you could get him much later, and he could be a project if you want to start Foles this year and, you know, let him develop a little bit. If you want to go tackle, you mentioned Christian Darrisaw. Alex Leatherwood is another guy they could target at the 20th overall pick. I was thinking Bateman at the 20th overall pick. Maybe I'm overrating him and his value right now, his draft stock. But wide receiver is going to be tough in the first round just because once you get beyond that first group, I think there's a little bit of a gap before you get to that second group of receivers like a Kadarius Toney and Rashad Bateman. So I don't know if I would go receiver in the first round at 20, depending on who's there. You mentioned a guy like J.C. Horn, I think would be a solid pick for him at 20. If they didn't want to go tackle early, I think a guy like Quinn Meinerz is a guy who they could pick up later on in the draft. But I do think that offensive line and wide receiver and corner are 3 of the biggest positions to target. They could look quarterback, but I don't think it's a pressing need. I think they can wait a year and see where they're at next year and let Nick Foles take the reins this season.
I think quarterback is a pressing need, but you can't force a quarterback.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what it is.
Tough position.
You know, it's a pressing need. You need to get a quarterback, but you can't force one to be good. So you can't draft one just because. Exactly. If Mac Jones is there, you draft him, but I don't know if he's going to fall to the 20th pick. Kadarius Toney is rated higher than Rashad Bateman. Daniel Jeremiah is top 50 players. Rashad Bateman is like 40 to 50th. I think he's in the 40s. So I know people on TikTok are very high on Rashad Bateman, but yeah, I've seen videos like a film analysis of like Rashad Bateman, but I think he can be really good, but he's not rated as high as guys like Kadarius Toney and guys like that. I think he's in the other class, like the Diami Browns of North Carolina and stuff like that. Even though Rashad Bateman could be good, but I think a guy who people are sleeping on are Tamarion Terry from Florida State. He didn't play in 2020 much because he was injured, but he's a good-ass player. He's a really good player. Like, Tamarion Terry is going to be one of the steals in the draft this season. He's really good.
How far do you think he's going to drop?
Tamarion Terry?
Yeah.
I think he'd be like a third, fourth rounder. I think Amari Rodgers is going to be a really good receiver. He's going to drop to the third or fourth. So this is a really loaded receiver class. But my dream depth chart for the Bears for 2021, Nick Foles or Sam Darnold starting at quarterback, David Montgomery, Darnell Mooney, Tim Patrick, Rashad Bateman, Cole Kmet, Christian Darrisaw, Cody Whitehair, Sam Mustipher, James Daniels, Bobby Massey, and on defense, Khalil Mack, Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, Robert Quinn, Danny Trevathan, Roquan Smith, Kyle Fuller, Jalen Johnson, Cameron Sutton, Eddie Jackson, and Tashawn Gibson. A good thing about Cameron Sutton as well is that Cameron Sutton played in the box a lot. So he can play the nickel slot. He can play in the box. He can play outside. So he's shown extreme versatility. So he'd be a huge get for the Bears. But overall, I think if the Bears make the proper cuts and spend right in free agency, this can be a very good team next season. Because Nick Foles, even though he's not a quarterback that you name with like the top level quarterbacks in the NFL, Nick Foles is still a good quarterback. I think he can win you games in the NFL. So you just surround him with weapons, great defense. I think they can have a good year next year.
You think they could be a playoff team?
I think they'd be a playoff team next season. No doubt about it.
They were there. I was very surprised that they were still there at the end of the season this year.